to this Playa Presents at the library, and thank you all for coming, both those of you makers and those of you groupies. So I'm Amy Hutchinson, I'm the library director for Lake County Libraries, and all of the people who are not presenting today already know that, so. And I'm glad you guys made the trip down here, and I look forward to having you again, although maybe not with you a little later this spring. And I'm going to introduce Deb Ford as the executive director of Playa and turn the program over to her.
Thanks, Amy, and thanks for coming out. And I'm sorry that some people made the workshop today, but some people didn't make the workshop. Judith gets the prize for 130 miles away. Oh, write it down. One way. Anyway, so we received one of those Lake County Cultural Coalition grants to partner with the library to offer to bring Playa Presents to Lakeview, just as sometimes it's hard for people to get out to Summer Lake, etc. So, you know, we're just trying it, and on that sheet that's around, this one, so the next one is going to be on April 18th, but anyway, even if it's a small crowd, it's important. So, and thanks for the artists for coming down and getting off the campus for a bit. Our first, we're going to alternate between readers and visual artists, or writers and visual artists, and our first presenter is Christina Nichols. She's from the Bay Area. She's been working in India and traveling extensively. She's had work published in Harper's, Paris Review, Bornica. Yeah, okay, and to others. Let's welcome Christina Nichols.
The work I'm doing right now at Playa is kind of in a construction zone with lots of dust. So I'm just going to read a little bit out of this novel that just came out in June. It's kind of living with, in a way. This one character lived with me for a pretty long time, and we're still kind of attached to him. So this is called Waiting for the Electricity, and it's set in the Republic of Georgia, which is a former Soviet country near, right above Turkey. So I'll just read a few pages from the beginning. So in the beginning, when God was distributing the land to all the nations, we Georgians missed the meeting. The next morning, we looked around and realized we were homeless. Hey, shouted God, what about our land? Where were you last night, he asked. You missed the meeting. I already gave away all the land. We were drinking, we cried out. We were toasting your name. God was so pleased with us that he gave us all the land he could save it for himself. That's when we're supposed to relax and enjoy the beauty of God's earth. The Armenians say, we missed the meeting too, and all he gave us were the rocks he was saving for himself. That's why their land is so strewn with stones, and also why they're now talking about it. We lived on God's land for thousands of years, enjoying its beauty and its bounty, always carrying a hoe in one hand to sow and reap the wonders of his holy earth. But because of our neighbors, on the other hand, we had to carry a gun. One day, God came to see how everyone was doing. He visited each country in the neighborhood. First, he went to Armenia and asked, how are you doing? Are you enjoying everything? Sleeping well? No complaints? And the Armenian said, everything's well. We're living very nicely on these rocks you gave us. God said, I'm so pleased that you're doing so well. This puts me in such a good mood, in fact, that I'll grant you any wish that you make. Well, the Armenian said, as we said, we're content, but if we were to think of something, our only wish would be that you destroy Azerbaijan. Those guys are always trying to steal our lake. So I went next door to Azerbaijan to see how well they were holding up. Hello, he called. The Azeris were busy boating and fishing on the Caspian Sea and eating up all the caviar. How are you doing down there? Normal, praise God. Well, what do you people wish for? We'd really appreciate it if you decimated Armenia. They're a bothersome neighbor, always trying to usurp one of our wheat fields. So God came over to Georgia. Victory to you, Balmar we cried out when we saw him, resting by our sheep horns filled with wine. We kiss you. We were already so pleased with his bountifulness that when he asked what we wished for, we said we needed nothing. We told him, we don't ask for anything. Just grant Armenian and Azerbaijan their wishes. That's how the story goes. It is said that in order to keep stories alive in our hearts, we have to tell them back to each other. Because when you only listen to stories and don't tell them back, you become like the man who picks grapes but does not sow the seeds. You become like the one who reaps the harvest but does not prune the vines. You can become catatonic and easily led astray. In the olden days, when it was time for a boy to tell his own story, but he didn't know how to begin, if his mouth wouldn't work properly, as if it were filled with rocks, the elders around the fire would say, start like this. Once there was, once there was, once there was not. This is the beginning of every tale. It means that what was true once, and even a second time true, is not always true a third time. It was once true in Georgia that we only have one life, and so we shouldn't waste it on material pursuits. It was also true that we lived in paradise. But it took perseverance to remember every day that we lived in paradise. Here we have dancing, love, wine, song, ancient culture, and beauty, but no money. Therefore, we've become a little unfashionable because these days, money is the hero of the world. That's why I decided to try to tell the story of my country back, in order to keep some hope alive in our hearts, in the midst of a living condition that had become extremely difficult. For this reason, mainly, I was proposing the following letter in English. Dear Hillary Clinton, my name is Slim Ahmed Makashvili, and I am from a little town called Batumi on the Black Sea. It is a very small town. So to say, it is beautiful and sunny. It is the town for me. But then I worried. What if Hillary had never heard of Batumi? I didn't want her to feel ignorant, even though she should have heard of us because Inga Chakashvili and Maya Lomanishvili, both famous Georgian women, had great success when we played at the International Chess Championship in Batumi. I continued. Batumi is the little town that not many people know about. I know because I looked up Batumi on the internet, and there was only one picture of the palm tree. The tourist wrote, "This town looks like cheap paint." That is because we are under reconstruction. The local dictator is tearing down the old buildings and making many of the lawns in our town because no one can hide behind a lawn with a gun. In addition, the religious leaders are building 12th century spirituality huts. We are progressing civically and religiously. We even have a bank. It is shiny and modern bank, but no money left in it. New certification requirement in 1998 decreased the number of banks from 200 to 43. I really think we need to help over here in farmland, especially me. Especially because Georgia is a Christian country and it's difficult to have Muslim name in a Christian country. If I had more Georgian name, such as Davito, Dato, Timori, or Toto, I could get higher governmental position. But Hillary, I'll try to write you more about myself, but I'm not as interesting a person as you are, obviously. But still, I'll write something. I love animals, especially fish. Once I had a fish which I called the lid. Unfortunately, it had eaten some poison thing, and that was the end of his life. And what about you? Do you like animals or have your own pets? We have a small garden at home, but mostly I love cactus. I am an American lawyer, but personally it is very pro-life. The bosses are old communists, and the unfortunate circumstance is that the laws of our country can't change until they all die off. But now for important ancestral information. Have you heard of Buffalo Bill's Wild West? My great-great-grandfather from my village in Gloria followed Prince Ivan Maharaja to Iowa and introduced traditional trick riding to cowboys. People thought they were Cossacks, but really they were Koreans from my village. They could ride 3 horses at one time, standing on their heads. They were so skilled that even if they wanted to commit suicide, it was impossible to only on the ground. During Soviet times, government always forbid American cowboy movies on TV, but sometimes on religious holidays they showed them. Since we are such maniac religious people, this was crafty meant by Soviet government to trick us to stay home to watch taboo movies instead of going to the church. My grandfather watched these movies, The Magnificent Seven, Stagecoach, always trying to catch a peek at his relatives. My grandfather, after watching cowboy films, said, "The only hope is the cowboy." He began to imitate the cowboy. He wore a straw hat and sat on the balcony plucking an instrument made of strings across a coconut. He insisted that my father call me Slims, from Slim Sherman, after the legend of Ben Hur. So, you see, Hillary, even though I come from ancient poetical culture, I am cowboy, and I come from cowboy family, true American, like your bush. Even though Swims Off Men resembles Islamic cowboy name combination, it is really 19th century name expressing the same early Georgian dream for independence from Russia. Like 19th century poets Nicholas Barakashvili and Akaki Tsereteli, but Hillary, don't worry. If you do not know Georgian poets, that is normal. The Muslim part, the Ahmed part, is said it this way. Ahmed, from the back of your throat. It tastes like the truth, like the sound of a Peruvian frog. Actually, it tastes like love. Hillary, I know that in English the phrase, I love you, is very beautiful sounding. And in French, je t'aime, again, very beautiful. Perhaps you will think that our Georgian expression for love is not so beautiful. Yes, not so very beautiful. But now I wish to ask you a most important question. Have you seen the movie Jesus Christ Superstar? Do you know about the theme song in the movie? Don't you mind about the future? Think about today instead. We have been living that way for a very long time now, for 15 centuries maybe, and I don't think it's very good advice. But now we are freeing ourselves from Russia, are holding out our hand, and waiting for your help up. Respecting your way, Swims Off Men will push you.
This is just a text. I'm going to start. This is just kind of a artist statement. It's pretty dry. I remember before I started, this has been addressed more current, but the first ones is that coming right off of a writer, it's interesting, I think, is that some of the history in my work is based on my personal experience with my family and with the sites that I visit and things that I have been tracking for a very long time. So it has to do, when I print, I'm a printmaker, but I have to do drawings, is that it's about the materials and how they intersect the subject. So the materials are part of that. And I'm trying to, let's see, go right through here. So this is the This is the first one, it's not very clear, but this is, I just thought I'd show you one of the books that I've done. I did one before that, they're clamshell books of, in this case, there's 10 photographers and lithographic prints, under color, 6 pages of letterpress text. And what this is, and it's in a clamshell box, and it's called Hanging Fire, which means pending, and it comes from Arizona, from the Copper Queen mine, which I talked to Deb about this a little bit, but it's where my grandfather worked for a long time. It's on the border of this Mexican border down by Douglas, Arizona. It's beautiful territory, but anyway, this is the Copper Queen mine as in 1990. And it has a fabulous history, a very interesting history, but then I decided to tell a story, a narrative story, through these visual images, and the text is from Emil Zola's Journal, which is the same, the mine at Journal is at the same time period as the Copper Queen mine, and it has a really fluctuating history about resolution, in 1895 and all the way to the 1930s. So I just thought I'd show you these things that have worked that way. The next set, really artistry, these are they're digital images that have been printed very quite large. It's very hard to see. I don't know how to focus it maybe, but anyway, the story behind these is that I found when my father passed away, I found in the shed all these pictures and all these photographs, and I started taking the pictures apart, the frames apart, and found all these things that you see, which are these light shapes. And I never knew what my father did particularly. He never could say what he did. And then so I decided to track him and track the way that he worked. And so I went, in this case, I went to Richmond Flat in eastern Nevada, where they did proving grounds. And then I went to it's down in Lompoc, to the Air Force Base that launches, with at that time launched missiles, but now launches satellites. So I got access to these places, and so I decided to kind of put these two things together to track and also see the beauty. These things that you see coming down, these light shapes, there's a lot of images. I'm just going to try to go as quickly as I can, and they're quite large. These are the light shapes when they even now send a satellite out in Southern California, and then if you're in Ojai or over by Santa Clarita, you will sometimes see these things at night. When it reaches the atmosphere, it makes these color shapes in the sky that are just beautiful. So here's the dichotomy of something that's very scary. As a young person, I found it very scary. I'm that cover group. And then there's these little bubbles that you can barely see. There are the bubbles on the park plane that was taking pictures. So these were really quite small. On this side is another whole set of images of the launching of Polaris, on the Polaris submarine, the nuclear submarine, of launching the missile coming out of the ocean. This is an underwater definition. But what's hidden behind there, which is really clear in normal prints, what's hidden behind there is another story. So they're like layered stories. In this one on the right, the story comes from a 19th century book on shark fishing. So the images and the little engravings that were in the book kind of as unintended consequences when you start messing around at the bottom of the ocean, and the people's feelings about that. And now this side is where they store the nuclear fuel after they've detonated, back in that time they detonated the atomic bomb. So it is not a bad thing or a good thing. I just kind of relaying my feelings about coming to terms with my own history, as well as putting my side a little bit in there and my other side in there. And it's really quite stunning in my mind. And then the next one is a little bit more it's about things that can't be constructed, things that can't be torn down. So this is a silo, these are wood cuts, and this is a laser cut, wood cut on the left, and chico-lay, which is a pasty paper onto it. They're very small, this one's very large. And this is a silo in Wyoming, and silos are really hard to take down because they're made of concrete and they can't really come down, so they just stay there forever, it seems, except for this little tin one, which is completely bare. They're really quite beautiful, and then I started getting less photographic and making things that are a little bit more frenetic, and have a little bit more touch to it. So continuing with this old silo here on the left in Illinois, and then I went to New York. We have a studio in New York, and we went there right when they were starting to rebuild 9/11. We were really close to walking there, and this is from the church that looks out, and they're just now starting to rebuild, but that can come back, this can't come back. And so these are just my experiences, my life views. Then I was in Illinois again, and I had the wonderful opportunity to work with Joe Ritchie at the Kurt Center of the Arts and the master printer Oscar Gillespie and then my husband Jack Stone, where we had this ADM plant, which is they're processing all of the corn to go into ethanol. And it's right outside the studio. And it's really a spectacular sight at night, especially it lights up. I mean, it's one of these things that's spectacular, but then they're making this ADM thing, and it's secret. So anyway, I took this picture, and then I ran it through software. So we created a CAD program that could, you can't get any donuts in here. So here again, materials and idea, and we then cut this with a water jet cutter, and down in the machine shop, which services Caterpillar and Komatsu for engineering. So it was so much fun, and it's quite large. It's like 3 by 4 feet. And so now I have the ADM plant as this kind of frenetic thing, but it's also kind of a wonderful experience to be able to cut. That's the wood cut itself, or left. So it's like a piece of lace. It's very, temporary. Then I kind of go on, I'm starting to change here, and these are Sumi drawings that I developed at Blue Cross, and in the snow, because I had never been there in the snow, and it was so beautiful, but it was the caged trees that they were doing, and also we don't have local hay in California. And they had full hay, and this one's over at a part of in Illinois, but it's just fantastic imagery to me. But it was the caged trees, it's kind of having something come up fresh and new, something having a new identity from something that was being kind of buried there. And so I did all the Sumi ink drawings, and then these are more Sumi ink drawings with woodcut. And so I just kind of kept doing that and then changing to software. So I do. Here's another digital image of the trees growing. I started this whole thing is about trees now. But trees growing, and I came down from Montana down. I think it's 84 in Oregon, and there's a tree farm, so I've never seen such a thing in my life, and so it's really windy. And so we got out and go inside this tree farm, and it's a 360, incredible you just go on YouTube and look at people's videos. It's an incredible experience to be inside this thing that looks like it goes forever, and they're poplars. And so I had the opportunity to present these in Japan, and I did these. So these are the pictures that have been skewed in software, but then the digital image that you see is a Google map, a Google kind of like a satellite map of that exact farm up there in Oregon. So I call them paper trees because they just keep going. And so kind of ripping off that is that these are really quite green. They're really very green. Is on the left is Bambusa Bulgaria in Taiwan. We live next to this most incredible park, and it was a center of the town, and it was just so lovely in Taipei. And I would go in here, and every day they manicure all of these bamboo trees, and they have forests in there, and they also have little labels on everything. So I went and took my notebook and wrote down all the different kinds of things that I could see and how they look different and how they grew. And then what we did, again with Jack's help, we did a 3D wraparound, and it's a black stencil sumi ink. And if you look really closely in there, it's you can see things like butterflies, as I do, butterflies and frogs. And if you know anything about happy in Taiwan, everything, my students were always doing butterflies, and which I was not used to. I was used to more angry art. And so in here, it's kind of sweet. I mean, it's just, at first I went, I don't know, there's a butterfly in there. But, because it's pretty random, it's kind of, it's like the IEA impact. So, but anyway, it's quite wonderful. And we worked, part of my project was to work with students, and one, and a lacquer painter that I knew there, and we went and were able to, it took all that, almost all 6 months, we went to one of the biggest printers they had, commercial printers. They're the ones that do the 9-story things and hang down. And they printed these for the students. So they had never done a digital print. And then we also got to test paper. So we printed Japanese papers, we printed it on tie-dye, which is basically what they call tie-dye papers, but it's like a tie-dye. And we printed oil-based and UV, and it's just so much fun. And so all the students got to do one, and then that's how that was printed. It's from that company. In the middle is the one that I'm working on at Playa. It's called Into the Mist, and there's another one called Out of the Dust, and then this other one is just a recent photograph I took right outside, and that's at Playa. This one is with the reflections in the water. So incredible. Going back into the mist, this is bamboo again, that's in a different location, and I've stretched it out. And what these are doing is kind of marking, for me, it's marking my journey, just like the bamboo circle there, it's marking my journey, how I'm relating and seeing kind of my own life go a little bit faster. So into the mist and then out of the dust and up through the water, and it goes on and on. And these are all scrolls, so I'm hoping that you can see that the Playa is going to offer just a wealth of possibilities for continuing this kind of journey. So that's you can see, if you look here, you can see how dense they really are. So if you have questions, you can come up with that another time. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Our next writer comes to us most recently from Portland, but she was the high-powered executive advertising in New York, and is also raised in LA. But I wanted to read one thing here. Rita Haynes has lived two lives. Her first involving Stanford, MBA, New York City. It's just to give you an idea of some of our artists. Ad agencies and a conventional married with child life in suburban New Jersey. That life ended the day her 6-year-old son died 3 weeks after her 40th birthday in 2007. Rita began writing in 2008 as part of her healing process. I'm not sure what she's going to do for us today, but welcome, Haynes.
So, I'm working on my memoir, but I've got that. So, I have 2 pieces, and I'll just read them. The first one is from the beginning of the book, but at least at the moment, I think it's the beginning of the book, prologue, so this is the first thing that's really good. I wake in the morning with my son's funeral and dress in black. It's a sunny, bitter, cold Wednesday in January, and I put on the well-worn velvet jacket and A-line skirt that I had dry cleaned the day before. Accessories include my grandmother's pearls worn at my wedding 16 years before, a Cartier watch from my husband the year Evan was born, and a headband from my cousin's Ziploc pharmacy from which we helped ourselves for days. At 10:30, we get into our silver Volvo and drive to the church. Not our church, we don't go to church, but one nearby. We waited back while watching what looks like over 100 friends, colleagues, neighbors, and strangers file in, most also dressed in black. A few minutes before 11, our families emerge and sit in front. When it's time, I stand, walk to the altar, open 6 tight sheets of paper, and without tears, give the eulogy, trying to make sense of the world without Evan. No more Saturdays with Evan jumping into bed, shouting, "It's time to get up." No pestering each morning to check the national debt clock online, wondering when it will stop going up. And no more questions about when his teacher will get to the hard math, because what they were doing is just too easy. I finished by telling my 6, never to be 7-year-old boy, "I know you want us to be happy. I feel this is true, but only hope it's possible." Throughout the service, my mother on my left and my brother leaning forward and me behind hold my hands, just as my mother-in-law holds my husband's. Only one inappropriate moment during the priest's homily. His calm and soothing words rise and pitch as he goes, and strangely veer into something like a wind-up to an altar call, inviting my son's daughters to find comfort in Jesus. I start to giggle, angry, accusing our tragedy as a recruitment opportunity. Only my husband notices my brain from reading other form, and I get through the rest of the day as planned. A friend later proudly compares me to Jackie O. Evan wasn't my only child, and I gave his eulogy because I could not let others, those who did not carry him in their wounds for 9 months or nurse him with their body for 2 years, speak to who my son was and what he meant to me. But I wore black because it's what one does. But truly, I should have worn sackcloth, rough burlap, and smeared my body, my hair that day with ashes, thereby telling the world, "I'm not okay, I'll never be okay," and you all know it because you sit there and more and think there, but for the grace of God, go I, and thank God it's not me. And yes, thank God it's not you, because no one should have to bear this pain, this suffering. And then I was told that poor priest, unnerved by our tragedy, he fell back on the only answer he knew, salvation through Jesus Christ. But trust me, some of the parents and their children who cannot fathom this agony, and they long ago rejected the simple answers of your faith. If only I'd worn sackcloth, the devastating grief and despair of already descending would have been seen by all, and I would have reassured anyone that the situation was even close to bearable by the medication and pansepoids with black-clad wasps referred to in troubled times. Or I should have worn red, the blood we felt in our hands. My husband obsessed for months to be allowed him to dehydrate, and while reassuring him, I blamed myself for the Chinese herbs. Parents blame themselves when their children die. Because I remember one child that could safely to adulthood, so when they dropped dead, we clearly fucked up. Blood in our hands, and we used the ashes in the urn to prove it. Or I should have arrived at the church naked that cold January day and made visible to all how Evan's loss would impact me. One death stripping away years of the life from psyche itself. When Evan left his body in that emergency room, moving so quickly and easily into the light, he took with him absolutely everything I knew about myself. It would take years to piece and knit me back together. But I did none of this. I could not make a scene. I could not make anyone any more uncomfortable than they already were attending a funeral for a 6-year-old.
I was a well-behaved grief mother, and I wore black, as if it was simply a parent, a friend, or even a husband who had died, but it wasn't. So, that's a good time. The next scene happens, actually, the second show was the scene. This next piece happens about a month after the funeral. I didn't know how to grieve, or fix the hole in my heart that I swore I could really feel. No one prepared me for losing my child, no one prepares anyone. Gone are the days when children frequently die, at least in the US. It probably wasn't easier 100 years ago, but at least it had done someone had gone through it. Now it's rarely discussed, treated almost like a dirty secret that would be impolite to discuss in its company. So what does one do? I wasn't technically depressed. I was getting out of bed, going to work, wasn't suicidal, so I didn't need antidepressants. I continued my weekly therapy, adding grief to the marriage issue. I was reading the pile of grief books from parents piled next to my bed, but it wasn't enough. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I felt life had lost meaning. I needed a way to accept the unacceptable. All the grief books mention compassionate friends and support grief grieving parents and siblings. The website put me off with its butterflies, a common symbol of death that felt kitschy to me. Flowers, pastoral fields, and an old-fashioned logo with a pair of hands in the shape of a heart. It didn't overtly talk about God or Jesus, but the whole thing felt kind of churchy and Midwestern. The key message, however, you are not alone, registered. I felt alone, and was estranged from the only person, my husband, who knew exactly what I was going through. Maybe these people could help. The last Tuesday of February, I made my way to the Presbyterian Church in Midtown Manhattan for the 7 o'clock meeting. Surprisingly, dozens of people were rolling around, the majority white women in their 50s and 60s. I was 40 but felt young, though I was overdressed in my work clothes, designer jacket, handbag, tall black boots. I made my way around the long tables where they were checking people in. Parent or sibling, the woman asked. They had groups for both, and after writing down my name, email, Evan's name, birth, and death date, I liked this part. It made me want to have existence in the world real. She gave me a name tag and directed me down the hall to the room where I found an empty middle chair and sat down. I hadn't expected tea and cookies in someone's living room, but I also hadn't expected an older female version of what I imagined AA meetings to be. People from all walks of life gathered together for really unfortunate reasons in a church basement type room with white walls and fluorescent lighting, everyone sitting uncomfortably in folding metal chairs. I started to swarm and remembered how much I hated groups. A couple people finally stood and welcomed us. They said they were one of us. One sat and we sat to heal over time and stayed to help the newly bereaved. Unfortunately, there were also new people in these meetings every single week who broke their heart, broke mine too. They then asked us to form smaller groups of 10, since there must have been at least 70 of us. I noticed a minority of men tried to find groups with other men. I got up and dragged my chair over to the nearest circle. I looked to be one of the youngest. A woman introduced herself, said a few words, and then asked us to introduce ourselves and share where we were that week. This seemed vague, so I was glad I didn't have to go first. My name is Janet. My son died 13 years ago in a car crash. He was 17. My name is Susan. My daughter committed suicide 10 years ago. She was 16. My name is Leah, and my son died months ago. He was 6 years old. We don't know why he died. Just like my imaginary AA meeting, dead children have said the roots. As the stories and tragedies and heartbreak piled on top of one another, I slid further down in my chair, crossing my arms and legs, with mostly teenagers, some adults, one stillbirth, the woman who looked younger than me. Suicide, drugs, car crashes. Mine was the only dead elementary schooler, the only one without a cause of death. The pain in that circle, all the circles around us, was crushing. A woman to my left stood out, late 50s, tall and blonde, with heavy bags under her eyes. She wore what looked like a flowery Ramona-style dress. She looked to have been a beauty in her day. It had been 10, maybe 15 years since her son had died in his 20s. I don't remember what. She sat upright in her chair, legs crossed, arms folded, strands of gray blonde hair falling from her loose bun. Her makeup was layered on, making her look older than she probably was. There were just some days still that I never make it out of my room, she stated in a flat voice, staring past us. Then I just know it's going to be a brief day, and I go back to bed, pull up the covers, and that's that. She wasn't smoking, but there wasn't a drink in her hand, but it's almost how I remember her. So great was her despair and heartbreak all those years later. 90 minutes after I arrived, I rushed into the cold New York area, ran to catch my train, feeling worse than when I arrived. For once, I couldn't wait to get home. Some people had their kids for years, but now with the pain of drugs, bad decisions, mental illness, or suicide, all women had their child even a day. It was all too much. Now I wasn't alone, but it would be years before I went back. What I needed was hope, and to believe the woman in the flower and the dress was for me.
Our next presenter did our workshop today, comes to us from Tucson, Arizona, where she teaches sprint making and mixed media arts at University of Arizona. Cerise B.
I'm gonna pretty quickly. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, and I grew up in a house that looked like this, 10 miles from that town in the middle of nowhere. And there's a reason I show you all this. I grew up doing jobs like this, and this was the sort of, I guess you would call it play. And we were pretty poor, but I definitely did not know that. My mother was an art appreciative nurse, but with 8 kids, she worked pretty much full time and raised us. And so this is one of her rare paintings. My father is an OCD collector of crazy outdoor tools. So this is one in our shed. This is another wall. I can show you walls in our basement. I can show you tons as well. So early on when I started doing art, I did a lot of watercolor. I hadn't gone to school for it. And these are the kind of watercolors I did, very tight, very photorealistic. And I went to undergrad and I discovered etching in Italio, and actually I discovered that I loved everything. And I have to thank my friend Judith, who I haven't seen in over 20 years, who was living where I went doing my undergrad. She traded one of my first prints I ever traded with anybody, and she came here today. I had no idea. It was a big surprise to me. She was in the region. She came today, she brought a pot. She traded with me when I was an undergrad and one of my original prints. So you're welcome, and I want to thank you for coming. It means a lot. So what I discovered in undergrad is I loved everything. I did small metal, one small metals. I liked 3D, I liked 2D, I liked play, I liked it all. And I was looking to go to grad school and find a way to put it all together. And these are some of the first pieces that put all those parts together. So you're going to see a lot of mixed media pieces that have etching or prints in them, and they're both structures, so that opens out there's a lot of color. And they often fold up, and they're referencing early on a lot of that life that you recognize. So some of the earliest pieces I did were under a series called 33 Wishes, and they relate very much, the wishes were just a touchstone or a beginning point, but you can see a lot of referencing back to that early childhood, those tools, and you can still see, I think, a connection to my mom's aesthetic that was somewhat tight, realistic. For instance, this is a complicated box, but it's hard to see in the light. But we're seeing sort of front and side views, and the parts that open up, the things that pull out. And if we see that same box from another view, front and back views on the left-hand side, there's an Italian that's my mom's work glove. And up above our buttons. And it's all about sort of the legacy of my grandmother. Book structure pulls out, and that's the Lost River Range, which is the area that I grew up in. So you'll see a whole series of pieces that are combining all the things I loved. And they're very much narratives and related to where my youth and growing up. They sort of transitioned into a series called Proper Tools, and if you saw those tools like that, it's no surprise where I get some parts from. And those are a lot about personal barriers and how we communicate with each other, things that we hide or don't hide from each other. All very narrative-based again. So this is the front view, open, and this is the reverse view of that same structure. A lot of things have drawings, many of them have intaglio or leaf prints in them. This is one of those, people always ask, oh, how big are these, how small are these? And this is probably the smallest 3D structure I've done. It's actually 2 inches by 1.5 inches. It's like 1/2 inch. And it opens with a little etching inside, it looks like that, a single specimen. And then the largest one is about 3 by 3 feet tall, I'd say. I put this in just for my colleagues because we were talking about this particular book, but I was saying I wish you could see the other side. Yeah, sad to see it. I use a lot of found text and found imagery, and I've been included in several artist book exhibitions, strictly because I think what are considered sculptural artist books. And this is using an old encyclopedia I have from the 1800s. And I was invited to an exhibition called Love and/or Terror, and I made this piece. I know it's made an exhibition, right? And I made this piece, and here in the encyclopedia, there was actually a heading, a page heading that was "Hurrah to Husband and Wife," and I could not use that, so. And then this is the happy couple inside. I make a lot of prints that don't end up in boxes. This is about my inability to do math. And all very narrative. We'd be here all day and through the week if I told you the story for every one of these. But I'm glad I threw some straight out prints just for you, Judith. But I hopefully you'll recognize the etchings that are in all these. This is my first ever all digital print, and I have to say only ever all digital print. I tried. Not so good at it. I just am still really into being toxic and killing my liver. So I do a lot of those. But I still live a party that loves to do so many things beyond printmaking. So these are mixed media pieces, color claimed identities of real photos that most of which came from a shop in Colfax, Washington. If anyone knows where that is, about 1,000 people here. They're original photographs, and I wondered how these ladies, someone was selling them for 50 cents a piece. And so I made these whole identities for them. Constructed, the whole installation was pretty bad. They life-size movable bodies that they could fit on, and you could put them in different positions, and speculated about why they might have been forgotten or left. And that's one partial installation. The installation is awful. I made a whole little book box structure, which was way better than all the work I put into big things. And it ended up being this piece that opens up an accordion fold with those same ladies, and it was much more successful. I should have just stuck with what I do, I think. I live in Arizona, but my heart is still very much in Idaho. And I have a little house in my room, like a tiny little house. And I go there every summer, and my life has become very disjointed. I cannot keep track of which house, and a lot of my work has become disjointed. I can't find all the parts. And for quite a while, I was making a series just based. I spent a lot of time looking at the environment, the landscape, the use of landscape. I was fascinated. I thought joint grass, or snake grass, some people call it snake grass, was the most amazing thing on the planet. It turns out it's really horribly invasive. And yeah, it's really hard to investigate. This is called aquifer seepage. It's a kind of a joke about people's misconceptions of what happens to pesticides and chemicals that go in the ground and where they go, and how the aquifer lives. It doesn't work. So you make a lot of work that has to do with looking for my sense of place. I know I want to be in the Western United States, but I still have not quite found the exact fit for me where I can still make a living. And so that's an example of a print. It's a woodcut, and then the final large piece that was made to go into. You'll see a lot of elements that get used over and over. You might recognize those crazy monkey toes. Those appear in a lot of things. Those are really toes, I'm not going to lie. You also see a lot of arcs or circles, and those are referencing the pivot marks. You can see a lot of people fly from east to west, and you'll hear on the plane, what are those big circles down there? And I can't help myself. I found myself turning around on the plane. Do you know about irrigation? Like, I'm the person that you're thinking, shut up, lady, I'm her. So I have a lot of things that are alluding to or using metaphors with things from the natural environment. I'm assuming you guys have some experience here. Yeah, they're not little balloons, they're little things that make little balloons. This is just some mixed media pieces I made after a trip to Wales after my first sabbatical. And they're very much about passages and trying to get from one place into another. I'm still again trying to reference finding a place of comfort, but looking for how I can enjoy the passage. And I was very much influenced by the Welsh architecture, as you can guess. And there's still those categories. Oops, sorry. And so I used those for quite some time. See a lot of water energy. Let me put the dog up here, I'm sorry. And then there was a big break. My mother passed away unexpectedly. It was very traumatic because she was my best friend. And I had struggled to make work for quite some time. In fact, this is the first piece I made after she died because I was committed. I committed to it long before she passed away. I tried to make works that were based on what I was doing before and taking care. And so these are some pieces that I had made. Most of the parts were done before she ever passed away. And so they're okay pieces. I really struggled with how to get them done and how to make the finished pieces. And which brings me to Playa. And the gift that Playa is, this is one of my first mornings at Playa. I have it this time, but I was getting up every morning. I'm not sleeping a lot through them, but I like to catch those. You think you're getting up every day, I don't. But the gift that Playa is a separate space where you can, for me, it's different for everybody, but for me, I'm looking to figure out how to remake. I'm not just there to make as an artist, but I'm looking to heal physically, emotionally, and also have a separation and space to renegotiate how I am as a maker. And Playa has provided that for me. So this first piece I made was for an exhibition called Invasive Paper. And this is about the most common invasive weed in the West called spotted knotweed. I don't know if you guys remember that, I'm guessing so. And then the human introduced moth that's been used to eradicate it. I did make a trip to Wales right before I came to Playa, and I did a little letterpress residency with Paula, who you know. And this is what I'm working on currently at Playa. I'm taking these parts and altering the parts, cutting into them layers and layers on the parts. It's really ridiculously laborious. I keep stacking up the different configurations, trying to figure it out. But I took that one out. We're trying to do configurations. This is a new configuration I'm thinking of. And what Playa has done for me is given me time to play and reconnect, and it's been precious, precious time to me. Even making these little sample books, which is for the workshop I did today, was a form of play that was critical to me getting back into being a maker. And so that is where I am, and I want to thank Playa for letting me play. Thank you.
I'm going to make a little change and I have to apologize to you, dear already, just because of the technology issue. So we're going to flip flop.
I get them when they're all tired, ready to go.
It's all about gender.
So I'd like to introduce Essie Casey, who comes to us from New York, and is a Filipino-American filmmaker. Her most recent, well, not her most recent, but she recently released a documentary. Is it on PBS now? Jeepney? Will be on May? Yeah. Will be on PBS called Jeepney. So you should check it out. She's also here doing a documentary on Playa for fundraising purposes and just to get the word out, but for little segments that we can upload with grant applications and things like that. And so she's not just here as a resident. She's not unfortunately. She's looking more. Thank you, Essie. Did you find it? I have to switch your computer. It's not very nice. Isn't it? Murphy's Law.
The most common themes I saw in it were eagles, American flags, and cowboys. So it's just, what's going on, you know? And warm country, someone like me. A lot of different drivers love country western music. And it all started with the soldiers who came over from the US. And so you see pictures of John Wayne, and it's just this way that American culture has stayed pervasive in a country we really don't know that much about, we don't learn about much over in our social studies. But it's really made a lasting impact there, so yeah, I think they'd be really jazzed and much cowboy. So that one should be, yeah, I guess in May, I'll probably announce it on the Playa website or the Playa newsletter, where I'll let you know the exact time for this region. And I have another one that will also be a program called Independent Lens, which is also on PBS. And it's the oldest running documentary series in the US, and it's really big films. This one I was just a cinematographer on, and it's about a choreographer named Elizabeth Stratt, and she does this really crazy, acrobatic, very dangerous kind of dance.
Experiment with the idea of extreme action. More force, more velocity, more risk. I think my original belief and desire is to see a human being fly. We were really in touch with how to keep ourselves safe. And you have to get beyond the barrier of self-protection before you can really fly. I believe that I can do it. Part of the deal is you walk into the room and you're waiting for you might get a little first. It's like being invisible. And then suddenly, just one time, you would have never thought that that moment was going to cause such an injury, but it did. I was scared. I'm on this. Don't get in the bridge. There's magic. It doesn't exist everywhere, so you do have to catch it when it comes. You can't ignore it. You do need it. Because it's unsafe. Anything that's too safe is not action.
Yeah, so that will be on May 11th, so that's a definite time. I don't know what the show's Facebook page on.
What is it?
May 11th?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah, and then I have, I feel like 5 weeks or just to give you a sense of some of the other stuff I've worked on. This is a reel that I put together, just a selection of images from different films I worked on that I used to get hired for new projects. And so it's very abstract, but it just kind of gives an idea. Thank you very much.
And last but not least, most definitely is, Daniel gets up, comes here from LA. This is the second time I've told him. He is an actor. He even participated in Paisley Play recently. Pep Talk. Let's see. He is a playwright and is here at Playa working on his first novel. I'll let him explain his novel. Thank you all for being here.
Everyone for being here. It's nice to see you again. I have to stay. Oh, this is good. Okay, so I'm here working on my first novel, as Deb said. It's called Nicknames for Harold, and I've been really inspired by these memoirs that you've heard so much about that they go on Oprah and they make the rounds and then they turn out to have all these falsehoods in them. So I've been really interested in just that cultural phenomenon. So what I've done is I've kind of tried to do the opposite, is I've written a memoir of a fictional character that I'm in the middle of. And the backdrop of it is a true historical event, which is the deaths that occurred at Jonestown in 1978. And my main character, his name is Harold, and he has a lot of different nicknames at different points in his life. There's a lot of, in the novel, there's a lot of parentheticals, meaning that's what I'm calling it. There's a main narrative, and then he speaks to himself, and then speaks to himself, at different levels. So I would try, this actually isn't the super crazy part, it's a little bit more of a straightforward memoir part. So, anyway, so this is chapter 5. Harry skipping backwards to skip, for more context. I just got off the phone with my father, Roger, born in 1946, New Bedford, Massachusetts. Still alive, unlike all my other relations. I'm sure we agree Roger is one of the least sexy names on the planet, so let's not be shy about the shudder that just slithered down our collective spines. It's down at the bottom of the barrel, Bertram and Marvin. Marvin's okay if you're African American. No offense meant to anyone with those names, but people who end up choosing names for themselves, they never choose Roger or Bertram or Marvin, even if you are African American. Or the burden of Harold, for fuck's sake. We are all unblessed by unimaginative parents. Roger calls me Skip. That's what he started with, and after I left the nest, that's what he reverted to. He hasn't been able to keep up with my metamorphosing appellations over the years. So to him, I remain the wayward child version of myself, the prodigal son, intemperate, without virtue. The kid he was saddled with and never knew what to do with. I call the old man Raj, or even the Raja, depending on who. You might be surprised to learn that my dad is a good and decent guy, pretty regular despite going through his version of the ringer. Not that I'm particularly bad or decent, that's debatable, nor unique, but my dad and I don't have that much in common. He's a tenured humanities teacher at a fancy pants prep school in New Hampshire, may even be head of the department by now. Or wait, I think he may have moved back to Massachusetts. I will either confirm or deny that on further research. I just consulted my iPhone recent calls, and Roger's landline, which I rang only moments ago, is indeed area code 603, so that means he's still in New Hampshire. Wonder where my pistol brain got the mass idea. He's the real deal, Roger is. Ex-counterculture, tweed jacket with worn elbow patches, unlit pipe, since his tongue cancer, which I never saw but heard was gnarly. Remains stuffily ignorant about all forms of technology except those required by his job. Raj says he's getting better with emails and texts and social networking, though evidence has yet to be presented, to me anyway. And is a survivor of long ago multiple sex with female students / colleagues scandals that never quite managed to decimate his career, such as it is, teaching creative writing, essay writing, contemporary American literature. Hard to imagine him teaching Toni Morrison and Alice Walker along with Vonnegut and Kerouac. And a whole course on Fitzgerald, which is less hard to imagine, to 15 and 16-year-old poets. Plus, he coaches cross country, not hard to imagine, I mean, how difficult can that be? And lacrosse, which I played when I went to school there. Let's call it St. Francis Episcopal, shall we? And then there's a footnote. Skip, we'll definitely skip the real name of the school. The New England way of dealing with unpleasantness is to sweep it under the rug. I am fine with this. Last thing I want to do is make waves for Roger or the school by my commentary on his scandalous behavior. P.S. I agree that it's freaking weird that I went to a fancy pants New England prep school with Kennedys, Rockefellers, Kellogg's, Firestones, Hiltons, and a Nixon grandchild. By way of obliquely explaining his luck in keeping his job, the Raja's son rose in cancer, and in accordance, he moves like a crab, skittering to the left, scuttling to the right, burying himself into the sand, more deeply when the waves might erode his cover. Now that I have the facts of his current placement straight, I can divulge that I lived in the faculty housing of this hyper-privileged school when I was in 9th and part of 10th grade with Roger and his then girlfriend Rita, then his wife, then his ex-wife, post-scandal. Now his, what exactly? Roommate? Codependent shoulder to cry on? To be honest, they may actually still be married. I should know this. Maybe I'll ask her in our next father-son chat, whenever that will be. I fear that this section is outing me as a bad son, but trust me, Roger doesn't want to know about my life either. He's satisfied just to know that I'm still breathing. My condition outside of that would require Raj, the moonchild crab, to dig himself out of the sand at least a stratum or two and confront his past, of which I am a significant chapter. Won't happen. But you'll notice that I know exactly what he teaches and coaches because that's all he talks about, really. At least he's passionate, right? Despite the divorce or separation or remarriage and my complete lack of any recent communication with her, besides, oh, hello. Well, let me get Roger for you. Patrician Auburn and Rita, born 1960, more alive than Roger, that's for fucking sure. A classic 11 years older than me, retains her nomenclature as stepmother. I didn't talk to her this phone call at all. She's in her office busy working on that damn dissertation, which coincidentally is the exact same place she's been every single time my father has said, your stepmother can't get on the phone right now, but she sends her regards in the last decade plus. Even on Christmas when I call without fail. I mean, you got it. Roger is very working class New England darky white by provenance. Those bucolic and food infused, literature and rich lifestyle appearance and manner belie this fact. Roger's long dead long dead dad, Grandpa Harold Herrera, born 1921, Fall River, Mass., died 1958, quickly but hardly, near Shiprock, New Mexico, was the only son of Portuguese fisher people immigrants, hence my Latin lover sounding surname, and my unsexy old man sounding Christian name. That whole side of my family was from the Azores, the Portuguese-controlled archipelago, specifically Ponta Delgada on the island of San Miguel. Just call me Island Boy. And then there's a footnote. I just learned this from Wikipedia. Fall River is known as the 10th Azorean island. Sometimes when life gets hard to handle, I think to myself, you can't die before you get to the Azores. I gotta go. As soon as I get some cash, I'm there. The Pereiras emigrated to the U.S., sailing the Atlantic Ocean right around the time the Titanic sunk, settled in the Fall River neighborhood known as the Flint, and over time established a decent fishery. My favorite true Pereira Fall River story ever is that my great-great-aunt Lily, who was a domestic, cared for the aging Lizzie Borden, known in later life by the thinly disguised moniker, Lizbeth Borden, who obviously gave her father and stepmother 40 whacks despite the acquittal. Legend tells it Aunt Lily reported that Miss Elizabeth said as much. The old battle axe was a legend in Fall River, had never fled despite her excommunication from the Polite Society. And Aunt Lily was in the room when Lizzie Borden took her final spluttery, pneumonia-plagued exhale. She was the one who ran to get the doctor and then leaked it to the papers. Olden day, Aunt Lily Pereira was a fucking snake. After he fought in World War II, Grandpa Harold got married to a colorful local gal, part Luso-American like him, part Native American, Irish potato famine American, and un peu French-Canadian American. He impregnated Grandma Pereira with a sperm that became Roger, then hastily left the fishing boats and his family behind to follow some war buddy named Dick Wood. Yeah, that'd be kind of funny if it didn't end up tragic. To New Mexico in search of a highly paid gig for the U.S. government's atomic energy mission in the uranium and vanadium mines. This doesn't end well. Because of his GI status and race, at age 24, Grandpa Harold was a novice foreman in the mines. Ever politically sensitive, Roger says, not a slave driver, don't worry. Though it's unknown how Roger had access to data that helped him arrive at this conclusion. He oversaw tons of Navajo Indian miners. He came back a few times while Roger was a boy. On those brief trips back to Massachusetts, activities included, 1, bringing Roger Navajo blankets and arrowheads. I am actually in possession of one of each of these. Another New Mexican kitsch. 2, impregnating his wife again. And 3, saying goodbye to her corpse at her funeral. For his troubles, Grandpa Harold was blown to bits in a never-publicized explosion, 13 years to the day, very unlucky, from when he had returned home from fighting in World War II. For their troubles, due to their father's untimely and gruesome demise, 12-year-old Roger and his kid sister were left with a modest life insurance payout. Unlucky for his kids, Grandpa Harold didn't last longer. Since he'd spent more time in the mines than the average foreman, supervising the muckers, the Navajo dudes who dug shit out of the blasted rock. For sure, he would have gotten lung cancer and his kids would have received a greater compensation. But not until after 1990, when Congress finally passed a law saying, excuse us, sorry about all that inconvenient cancerous radiation. Grandma Pereira, née Ismelda Starling Smithy, born 1921, New Hampshire, died 1957, as predicted, Fall River, Massachusetts. They called her Stars. Not sure why it's pluralized, stars in the sky, her eyes. Because she was witchy and twitchy and had the gift. Put her hands on people, read palms, astrological charts, and tea leaves, mostly as a hobby, but she did make a few bones doing it. And she predicted her own death, knew what year and month it was going to happen from the age of 5, when she first learned what death was, locking eyes with her teenage brother as he died from injuries sustained from a fall from a ladder. The letter itself figures into this true life metaphor in some way. Maybe I'll come back and unfold it later. Stars was a quarter Pennacook Indian and the rest crazy as a locomotive. She had a pet goat for almost her entire life that she named Dolly Roger. Yes, my father was named after an old man's goat. Roger told me that Grandma Stars would bottle share the breast milk she produced for his younger sister with Dolly Roger, even though the goat was way into adulthood. Not that it would have been cool if Dolly had still been a kid. Stars claimed that Dolly Roger, who lived to be 30 years old, also had the gift and assisted her in some of the more mysteriously complex cases that clouded crystals. Stars also claimed, and why not believe a woman who foresaw her own demise and kept a lifelong goat companion that doubled as an intuit, that she was the direct descendant of one of the Wabanaki Confederacy tribeswomen who, in 1689, went door to door in Dover, New Hampshire, asking for a place to sleep by the fire, pretending to have lost track of their children in the woods. The native women were granted a place at a garrison house, and the next morning they snuck the fuck out, unlocking the gates of Dover town to let in some of their fellow Indians who'd been lying in wait. The natives were seeking revenge for an incident that happened at the end of King William's War the decade before, when hundreds of their tribespeople were tricked by colonists into thinking they were on their side, and instead captured them and sold them into slavery all the way to Bermuda and Barbados. The Indians, including my direct Matahari-esque descendant, burned houses and the mills and killed a quarter of the population of Dover. Take that, Puritan bitches. Geez, I do hail from a snaky line of Herrera dogs.
Thanks everybody for coming out. Pass it on, hopefully you'll come out quiet. I hope it's gonna be a lot safer.
It's snowing.
It's snowing again.